Hey there, and welcome to Camera Dads, episode number 6. I am one of your hosts, Mr. Phil Ringsmooth, and across the internet with me, as usual, is my brother and co-host, Simon. How you doing, Simon?
Hello. Hi, Phil, and hi, listeners. I can't believe we've already gone. This is our 6th episode. That's pretty awesome, Phil. Way to go.
Been doing this for half a year now. That's crazy. It's a
Mhm.
lot of fun. It's a
It
lot of fun. I
is.
like what we're doing.
I sure do. And I think we got a good topic tonight, and I think it'll be a good discussion. Hope our listeners like it as well. Phil, what's the topic?
So tonight we're talking about the two big types of lenses that it comes to shooting with DSLRs. You have prime lenses and you have zoom lenses. There's some other terms that get thrown around, and we'll try to hit on those too, but essentially those are the two main categories of lenses. So we'll kind of break those down and talk about what we use them for, what each is good for, and how each of us makes use of them. So Simon, can you go ahead and talk about in sort of a couple of minutes, what is a prime lens and what is a zoom lens? What do these terms mean for someone who might just be getting started with this kind of thing?
That's a good question, Phil. And I had no idea what these meant when I started getting more serious about digital photography. And as a teaser, by the way, we will make some recommendations near the end. So if you want to stick around to the end and hear what we have to say as far as what we think you should get or some good types of lenses to get, we will be doing that. But yes, a good question, Phil. What is a prime lens? So a prime just means that the lens is fixed in terms of its focal length. It can't zoom. And that seems like a huge restriction because pretty much every camera today can zoom in and out. You can buy a pocket camera that zooms in and out. So why on earth would you want a lens for a fancy DSLR that can't zoom in and out? And that's the big question. Why would you get one of these lenses, a prime lens? So that's a prime, and a zoom lens is just a lens that does zoom in and out. And really, pretty much all camera lenses fall into one of those two categories, prime or zoom. So that's what we're going to talk about here.
If you remember last week's show at all, one of the things that I touched on was that when I got started with digital photography, I essentially bought the camera with the longest zoom I could find. And I didn't know what a prime lens was. And when you began to educate me a bit more, and we started talking about prime lenses, I kind of sat in the camp of, why would I want that? Exactly what you were just saying. Why would I want a lens that doesn't zoom? What good is that going to do me?
Phil, it's funny you mentioned that because I went through the same process. I thought when I got more serious into digital photography, I thought I need a zoom lens because zoom lenses must be good. And the more you can zoom in, the better the camera is. And I had the same thought process.
Certainly a misnomer once you get into things, because the ability to zoom does not equate to getting better photos. I think that's something that I certainly used to think that, for sure. I would get a camera with the longest optical zoom that I could find, and just sort of anticipating that the photos would be better, that I could take cooler photos, I could take long distance photos and things like that. Well, it turns out that wasn't always the case. And a lot of times I was disappointed with what I actually ended up getting when I thought that I would be getting something really cool.
I think what you're saying is that experience mirrors that of a lot of people in our position, parents who want to get more serious about photography. Mobile phone just isn't quite cutting it. And so they look for a better camera. And that's what I got. In, I think, 2011, my wife and I got a little Panasonic ZS7 pocket camera. And one of the big selling points for me was it had a 12x optical zoom. And I thought, this is awesome. We're going to finally be able to take good photos. And it worked great on a trip to Washington, D.C. before our son was born. But then once our son showed up, boy, we were not satisfied with the quality of the photos. And I had no idea why, because we spent a couple $100 on this, what I thought was a really nice pocket camera. And honestly, it is a nice pocket camera if you know its limitations. But yeah, the lens zoomed. So why weren't my photos good? And you're exactly right. Longer zoom doesn't necessarily mean better photos. Why why would you buy a prime lens? What's the advantage of a prime lens that can't zoom in and out? There must be something, right?
Well, I bought a prime lens because you told me to.
Oh man. Well, gosh, thanks, Phil.
But I'll try to answer this as best as I can, and then you can maybe fill in some of the blanks or things that I don't quite get right. But the biggest advantage for me in getting a prime lens is the aperture that you can get with it.
Whoa, slow down. What is an aperture? What are you talking about?
Aperture science.
Oh, like in the Portal video games. Okay, got it now.
It's a thing
right.
for Portal video games. Yeah.
I'm on board.
Aperture is the amount of light that can come in through the opening. Am I saying that right?
Sort of.
I don't want to confuse anybody.
You're right. So it's like if it's raining out and you've got a funnel, like a funnel with a 10-inch opening, like the size of a dinner plate, versus a funnel with a small opening. The funnel with the big opening is going to let in more water. And the aperture simply refers to the size of the opening. And in a prime lens, you can let in a ton more light. It's like putting a bucket out in the rain with a massive opening or massive funnel on top. You're going to collect more rain that way, just like a lens with a massive aperture can let in more light. And that yeah.
What good is that for, someone just getting started with this, or someone who doesn't really understand the difference? What does it mean when I am letting in more light, but I still can't zoom with that lens? I guess
that's a good question.
Because that's one of the biggest differences between prime lenses, zoom lenses, is prime lens, is it that they have a fixed aperture, or that they have they
have a wider, they have a fixed focal length and a wider maximum aperture. They can go small.
That size of your bucket can get much larger on a prime than it can on a zoom lens.
Yeah.
So, but what does that really do for me when I'm trying to actually, when all I want to do is get a good photo? What really is the advantage of getting in all of that light when I can't zoom? Okay. And then when I can zoom, if I have a zoom lens, like what probably comes with your DSLR out of the box, but it doesn't let in as much light, why is that such a limitation?
So these are good questions, Phil. Photography, like a lot of things in life, is all about trade-offs. And when you get a lens that zooms in and out, one of the trade-offs is due to the optical properties of how the light is manipulated inside the lens. When you start zooming in and out, lose the ability to let in a ton of light. And it's just it's a matter of physics. Lenses that zoom in and out have smaller apertures because of the way that that the elements inside the lens, the glass elements, are moving back and forth. Unless you spend thousands of dollars on a crazy expensive zoom lens, does have a large maximum aperture. But most people, most parents who want to get better family photos won't be doing that, at least not for a little while. So the lens that comes with most cameras is the standard basic lens. Like you go to Target, Best Buy, you buy a camera, it probably comes with what's called a kit lens, and it'll say 18 to 55 on the side, and that means it zooms out to 18 millimeters, and we can get into what that exactly means, but basically it zooms out to really wide, so you can stand in a room and get a picture of the whole room. 50 or 55 millimeters, which means it's more narrow, and you can kind of zoom in on just one person in the room. But there's also some other numbers on that lens, and it's going to say 3.5 to 5.6. What those numbers mean is when it's
you're talking about the focal length now, right?
I'm talking about the focal length is 18 to 55. So a focal length of 18 millimeters is zoomed way out. Focal length of 55 millimeters is kind of
F doesn't. I'm thinking the F number.
Yes, the F stop.
F does not mean focal length, and that's something that confused me for a long time. It is called
no,
F
I know.
stop, and that's the number that you're talking about, where it says something like 3.6 to 5 point something, or
yeah, and no, this is all super confusing, and it's why a lot of people don't get it, and I don't blame you. I didn't get it. It took me a long time to understand this, but the standard kit lens, this 18 to 55 millimeter lens that comes with the cameras, the bottom line is it doesn't let in much light. The trade-off is you get to zoom a little bit, but the disadvantage is you end up using that little pop-up flash a lot, because when you're zoomed out to 18 millimeters, the biggest possible aperture you can get is, ready for this? Are you ready, Phil?
I'm ready.
F3.5.
F3.5.
That number probably doesn't mean anything.
A couple of years ago, that wouldn't have meant anything. No.
It basically means you have a smaller aperture. The thing with these numbers, it's reversed. If your number is small, like f2.8, f1.8, the smaller the number, the bigger
that's
the
actually
aperture.
In kind of what we're talking about. That's better as far as getting in more light, because that number isn't bigger is better. It's actually a ratio, meaning the closer you are to 1.0, the more light you're going to get in through that.
Yeah, bingo. Exactly.
So
exactly.
And that's going to, the amount of light is really going to determine how good your photos actually look. So the difference, let's kind of talk about a comparison here between the starting point for a lot of people is going to be the kit lens that comes with your camera, you know, the 18 to 55, and a starting point. The first step then with a prime lens might be a 35 millimeter or a 55 millimeter. Those are two pretty common places to get your first prime lens. And let's go with the situation of your kid's birthday party. And you're just at home. Well, one of the things right off the bat that you'll be able to do with that kit lens that's going to be much more difficult with the prime lens is just take a picture of the entire room.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you can zoom out and you've got the term is escaping me, but you can capture a much wider area. Of the room.
Yeah, you zoom out to 18 millimeters and you can capture the whole room, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and odds are you're just doing a kid's birthday party at home. You're going to have plenty of light anyway, unless you're, you know, in that particular situation. If you're talking about a picture of the kid blowing out the birthday candles and the lights are out, that's a photo that's going to be really difficult to get with a kit lens, because it's going to be so dark. It's going to be, when you take the shot and look at it later, it's going to be grainy, which is something that ISO is all about, but I don't think we'll probably get
that's a whole other podcast
ISO tonight. But you know, you can adjust ISO settings to kind of compensate for some of that. But if you took the same photo of your kid blowing out the birthday candles, what I'm envisioning is in my head here is, you know, you're really close to the cake and the kid's face is taking up most of the photo, and you just want that.
Oh yeah,
right?
I know
that
photo.
The candles are going around. That is a near impossible photo to get with a kit lens and do it well, because it's going to be dark. There's going to be a lot of motion in the flames and in the smoke. But if you try to do that with a prime lens and you get yourself in the right position, that's the key difference, is you have to physically move yourself back and forth to find the right position. You can't zoom with
and it's all
you're gonna
about go ahead.
Let me finish that real quick. You're going to get a much, not necessarily just right off the bat, but you have the ability with that prime lens to take a much better version of that same photo, because you can let in so much more light the light that you've got coming from the candles is going to do a lot more good than it would with the kit lens. You're going to be able to get that tack sharp focus of just the candle flames, you know, and maybe if you want your kid a little bit blurry behind there, you can have so much more control over that with the prime lens, because you can control the aperture a lot more than you can with that kit lens.
Yeah,
but the flip side of that same coin is you can't take a full room photo unless you've got a huge long room. You can't stand at one end of the room with a prime lens and take a picture of, you know, the kid and all of his friends standing on the back wall. You're going to be backed against the other side of the room, not being able to step back any farther, and you're not going to get all of them in there.
Unless you have a super wide angle prime lens, like a 24 millimeter prime lens, but most people don't. Those are pretty expensive and kind of a limited use case there. But you brought up a key word, Phil, which is control. The reason a kit lens won't get you that photo of that tack sharp photo of your kid blowing out the candles is because it simply does not have the ability to let in much light, because of the way the optical trade-off when you want to zoom in and out a larger aperture, you end up with a smaller aperture, especially if you're zoomed way in. If you're zoomed in as far as your lens can go, then you're going to have a really small aperture. And that means your camera's going to have to do something to compensate. Most of the time, that involves leaving the shutter open for a longer period of time, which results in a blurry photo. Because we all know how fast kids move. If I let my shutter open for half a second, even like a tenth of a second, your kid's going to move a lot in 1/10 of a second. But your camera needs to let the shutter stay open. Aperture is so small and you're not letting in much light. But if you get a prime lens, go ahead.
Is the way to compensate for that in that case would be, this is kind of a question actually too, with a prime lens, in 1/30th of a second, because the aperture can be so much larger, in that 1/30th of a second, it would take me, I'm just making something up here, a tenth of a second or a quarter of a second to get the same amount of light in in an equivalent sort of manner using a kit lens, because the opening is so much smaller.
No, that's exactly right. And you can actually do the math on. Yeah, you can run the math on this. And if we get really complicated into f-stops, every stop of light is half as much light as the stop before it and all that. So you can run the math, and let's say you get a really nice picture of your kid, and you take it at 1/30th of a second, and you're shooting your prime lens with a really wide aperture. Well, on a kit lens or a zooming lens, you're going to need to let that shutter open for like a 10th or a 5th of a second, which is really, really slow. Or what I see a lot of times, which is you get ready to take that photo and that little flash at the top of your camera goes, and that the
which
reason
is kind of like a big red flag that you and I kind of cringe at seeing that happen.
Yeah, I kind of do.
Because we know it's just going to wash out everything in the photo.
Yeah.
But as a default for a lot of people just getting started, I mean, I used to do exactly the same thing. I've got thousands of photos that I just took with the flash because that's the way I thought it was done.
And oh yeah, it's totally common.
They're all washed out and they don't look good, but you know, I didn't know what I was doing. And so I thought, okay, well, you're going to use the flash to get a bunch of light in there, and that's going to take care of that problem.
And it goes back to those trade-offs. Photography is all about capturing light. I mean, like, you can go back 100 years and the entire history of photography is all about capturing light. And if you don't have enough light, you got to do something. Either let your shutter open for longer or put more light in there with a little pop-up flash. Or you can get really complicated, raise the ISO and things like that. But our whole discussion of prime lens versus zoom lens, the trade-off you get with a zoom lens is you get these smaller apertures, which means you can't let in as much light, which if you're a parent out there and you want to know why that flash keeps popping up on your camera, it's because you're probably using a zoom lens of some kind, and so your camera has to add more light with that little pop-up flash, and then you get what you're talking about. The photos are kind of washed out, and maybe your kid is all kind of well lit, but everyone behind is kind of shadowy and dark because the flash can't reach that far. So you get these trade-offs again. But if you get a prime lens, like a 35 millimeter or 50 millimeter prime lens, then you have to use your feet to walk back and forth. And if you're at that birthday party, you're going to be like, you can cancel your gym membership because you're going to spend that whole party huffing and puffing as you're running around trying to get these photos, because you can't just zoom in and out. And so I think, Phil, I'm going to go on a limb here. I think we would both say that neither type of lens is better. They're just different types of lenses, and they both have their places, and they're good for different things. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. Neither one is better. So the idea isn't necessarily prime lens versus zoom lens. It's just they each have their advantages and their disadvantages. And one thing I think was interesting, and this actually ties in with our last episode about vacation photography. This year, because you and I just took a family vacation with our extended family and all of our kids and stuff at a lake, just a cabin on a lake for about 3 days. Mm-hmm. And I spent, gosh, like 80% of my photos from that trip were taken with my kit lens, even though I
was surprised by that. I didn't realize.
I was happy when you were surprised by that. After looking through some of my photos, you were.
Yeah. I was looking through Phil's photos and I was like, oh man, I bet I can figure this one out. And I would text Phil, I'm like, oh, you shot this with your 35. And he's like, nope, that was my kit lens. Oh man. All right. So I'd look through another one. Oh, clearly this one, you'd see the shallow depth of field. This had to be your 35. And he'd be like, nope, kit lens. And I was like, man.
Yep. Almost all
I don't even have a kit lens. I got to get me one of those.
Well, a lot of what you were looking at, Simon, was outdoor photos in the middle of the day on the beach, yep. Tons of sunlight. You can't get any more light than what we had. Mm-hmm. So that's a good point. Didn't necessarily need to have the prime lens for the purpose of having enough light to get that good photo. Mm-hmm. So I just brought the kit lens with me, and I was able to position myself, to get just enough I needed, to get the photo that I wanted without having to move back and forth or zoom with your feet, as it's commonly called.
Yeah. And and you're right. I mean,
I was very surprised how well I did with the kit lens at the lake this year.
And if you've got a situation where there's a ton of light, then a kit lens is great because you don't need to worry about not having enough of it. It's when the sun goes down and you're at the beach with your kids and you can see the sun on the horizon, or you're inside with your family or something. Or if you've got a small child and you don't want to be flashing that camera flash in your baby's eyes. I mean, my friends here in town just have a newborn. He's like less than a week old, and they don't want to be blinding their little baby with the camera flash all the time. Those situations are when it's fantastic to have a prime lens, because you can take these pictures in such low light by letting in so much more light compared to what you might be used to on a prime lens. And if you look at the f numbers, we mentioned f-stop on a kit lens, it's like 3.5 to 5.6. On a 35 millimeter prime lens, which by the way is what I recommend to pretty much anyone who's going to get into photography, is a 35 millimeter prime lens. On a lens like that, it's really common to have an f1.8 aperture. And as Phil, as you mentioned before, the closer to 1 you get, the bigger the opening gets. f1.8 is massive. You can take pictures with like candlelight and you don't need a flash. I mean, it's crazy what this whole amount of photography possibilities opens up that was never there before. and you have so much more control, like you mentioned, over your photos, because you can decide how much light to let in when you're using your lens.
Yeah, I remember when I first bought my 35 millimeter prime at your recommendation. It was, gosh, it was the day before my son's 5th birthday party, which we were having at a bowling alley. And I thought that a bowling alley wasn't going to be supremely well lit. It's often the case that bowling alleys are not, super bright, especially if you're there later in the evening. They're a darker place, and so I was able to use that 35 millimeter prime to get a lot better shots. But I was doing a ton of zooming with my feet.
Yeah, and it's always that trade-off.
But I'm thinking back to the vacation situation and some other situations on the exact same trip where it would be really difficult to get a good photo with the kit lens like I was using would be a campfire. Unless you're having a campfire in the middle of the day, it's dusk, which, crazy grandpa sitting by the fire all day. But
we don't know anyone like that, do we?
It's no, nobody.
Phil and I just got off from family vacation.
From about dusk onward, you're sitting around the campfire, you're making s'mores. You are going to have a really difficult time getting any good pictures of your kids in that situation with a kit lens, because it's just going to be too dark. And if you try to compensate for that by leaving the shutter open a little bit longer, we're talking, the difference between a 30th of a second versus a 15th of a second,
which is huge,
or a 60th versus a 30th.
Yeah.
If you're in the 20th, 15th, 10th, you're basically taking a movie.
Yeah. A lot of movement happens in that small amount of time.
So you really got to, I try not to go below a 30th. And if I'm doing anything with any kind of motion, I'll go a 60th, a 100th, a 200th, or smaller or faster. But, at the campfire situation, if you try to get a good photo of your kid, with holding the marshmallow stick over the fire, and you try to do that with a kit lens, it's either going to be too dark or it's just going to be really blurry. You're going to have
that flash going to pop up and ruin the whole thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Which used to be me. Absolutely used to be me. And then you've got, it's not dark anymore. Everybody's just bright white because of that flash. And then nobody can see for
and you get the red eye, like the red eye in people's eyes, and you got to fix that in afterwards. And it's a mess.
If you have a DSLR, and this is a bit of a blanket statement, but if you have a DSLR and you're taking photos and that flash pops up, it's almost like a warning that says, hey, you're doing something wrong, because this photo is not going to turn out the way you think it is. And by the camera bringing up the flash, it's trying to say, hey, maybe reconsider what you're trying to do here.
We don't have enough light. Photographer, you need to fix this. As we're talking about this, there's when my son was when he was born, and I mentioned that pocket camera, we had that little Panasonic pocket camera, which we still have. My photos weren't the same quality as others I saw online, or things like my friends would post on Facebook. And then I think I probably told the story on Camera Dads before. My buddy Kevin came over and he showed me his Nikon D200 camera with a 50 millimeter prime lens, which is a little tight for my taste. I now shoot a little wider than that. But along with letting in a bunch of light, there's other benefits to a prime lens too. And again, I'm not saying a zoom lens is bad. In fact, I think zoom lenses are great if you know why you're getting them. But when you can when you shoot with a wider aperture, then you can experience this whole new world called shallow depth of field. And That's
I was waiting
when,
for you to bring up the word bokeh.
oh, it's on my
I
notes.
think it's coming. I think it's coming.
Shallow depth of field is that photo that you've seen times online where the kid or the flower or the car or the object is perfectly sharp and in focus, but the background is super nice and blurry, and it's just got this pro magazine cover style quality to it. And you're shooting with your pocket camera, you're shooting with your mobile phone or something, and you might be thinking, there's some magic to this. There's no way I can get that because my photos always have that little pop-up flash and my backgrounds don't get blurry like that. Well, when you shoot with a wide aperture, it's because of the properties of light and the way light interacts with that wider opening that you can get your kid tack sharp and everything else super blurry. And for me, this was like a revelation. And I still have these early photos of my son where Kevin came over to our house and he showed me with this prime lens. And keep in mind, up until then, I was like you, Phil. I was like, we want a camera. I want a zoom lens because zoom lenses are great. And Kevin's like, no, you want a prime. And Ryan, my other friend who's helped me convince this, he's like, no, you need a prime lens, but you can't zoom. So Kevin comes over, takes a few pictures of my son, and instantly I was hooked. I realized that this shooting with a wide aperture, suddenly we could get the types of photos I had never thought possible. And there was no magic to it. All you needed was a lens with a big old aperture. And suddenly you can control depth of field and you can have a very shallow depth of field, which results in a bokeh in your background, which is bokeh is just that term that means out of focus area. And hold on just a second. Yes.
Speaking of dads.
Okay, go ahead.
Having a technical difficulty with the child.
Yeah, my son just out of bed. I'm sorry, listeners. I might have to help him a little bit here.
If you have to bail, we can bail. But
okay.
I was going
to. So for parents, for any parents out there who want to get better photos of their kid, and they're wondering why is the flash always up? Why can't I get the shallow depth of field that I see in magazines and on Facebook? And it's gonna, like, you're gonna level up 2 or 3 levels, and you're gonna achievement unlock.
Absolutely.
So
if you're considering this, and here's something that we haven't talked about yet is the cost of this equipment, of this gear. A 35 millimeter prime lens is going to set you back about $200, and a 55 millimeter prime lens, which is just a longer focal length, so that the distance that you are going to be in focus with is going to be farther away than with that 35. That's even more expensive, right? $250 or $300.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah,
just generally.
Well, if you shoot, I do want to pause for a second. It varies from camera to camera. Canon actually has a really good 50 millimeter lens for like $125, brand new.
Okay, no idea. That's great.
Canon also has a 24 millimeter prime lens. Nikon doesn't. Nikon has a 35 f1.8. Canon's got a 24 2.8. But what you're saying is true in that a lot of these primes are about in that price range of like about $200 or so.
So that's, for a lot of people, that's half the cost of the camera that you just bought.
Yeah, man.
You buy a DSLR for $350 or $400 on a good sale, and now you want me to go and spend $200-$300 more on a lens?
Well, I know what you're saying.
That's a scary step to take. If you're doing just fine with your kit lens, like I was, or thought I was when I got started, would you say, like, I'm trying to think of a good way to maybe recommend taking that step without buying it. One thing about DSLRs is that you can swap the lenses. So if you have a buddy or a family member that has either the same brand of camera that you do, or has a lens that's compatible, then you may just be able to borrow that. I used to work with a couple of great photographers. Ben Hollingsworth is one of them. We had him on the show a couple months ago. I think he shoots Canon, and I have Nikon, so I was able to borrow his lenses. But that's a great scenario. Like, okay, hey, we work together and you're way better at photography than I am. I'm interested in this prime lens thing that I heard about on the greatest camera photography podcast in the world, Camera Dads. And but I don't want to spend $200. Can I borrow your lens? Like, can I bring my camera to work someday? And you just bring your
Mhm.
lens, and we'll go out in the parking lot and take some photos. That would be a
And
fantastic way
someone like
just to
Ben
feel it out.
is they're probably going to be thrilled to do that, because a lot of photographers like explaining things, and if you have a buddy like that, they're probably going to be thrilled that you're asking and want to know more. Um, my my wife actually brought up something good when I was talking to her about all this. And Phil, did I lose you? Are you still there? I can't hear Phil. Hmm. Hmm. Hey, you. Hey, you. We're done sort of. Bill's Wi-Fi stopped working.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it just like crapped out on them. We only had a few minutes left. We're just about to do our recommendations. And we can just do it on Sunday.
Oh, like, okay.
I'll see if he can bring it. Mike to mom and dad's if they can make it. Just go downstairs for a couple minutes and finish it up. Anyway, we're done.
Okay. Sorry, I got bed.
Oh, that's okay.